The old panda had already crossed half the clearing when he noticed something was wrong. One lion cub was following him, the other was not. He stopped. The smaller cub stood near the edge of the bamboo, several meters behind its brother, watching the distance between them grow. The first cub kept walking. The panda didn't. He simply turned his head and waited. A few seconds passed. Then the smaller cub took one cautious step. The panda remained exactly where he was. Another step. Then another. Only when the cub reached them did the panda begin walking again. It seemed like nothing. But over the weeks that followed, he would do it again and again, until two young lions began to understand something they would carry with them long after they no longer needed him. The cubs had appeared near the edge of the forest several days earlier. They were young enough to stay close together, but already different enough that anyone watching could tell them apart without looking at their faces. The larger one always moved first. If something rustled in the grass, he investigated. If the panda changed direction, he followed. If a new path opened through the bamboo, he stepped onto it before his brother. The smaller cub was different. He stopped. He watched. Sometimes he followed only after the other two had almost disappeared from sight. The panda never went back to collect him. He never pushed him forward. He simply stopped moving. At first, the larger cub seemed confused by this. He would walk several steps ahead, notice that the panda was no longer beside him, and turn around. There they would be. The old panda standing in the path, the smaller lion somewhere behind, waiting. Eventually, the smaller cub would start moving again, and only then would the panda continue. It became a strange rhythm. Walk, stop, wait, walk again. Some days they barely covered any distance at all. The larger cub would wander ahead, return, wander ahead again, while his brother studied every unfamiliar sound before taking another step. But the panda's pace never seemed to change because of impatience. If one cub was missing, the journey paused. One afternoon, the three reached a wide stretch of open ground between two sections of forest. There was no danger waiting there, no sudden movement in the grass, nothing blocked the way. It was simply open. The larger cub crossed almost immediately. The panda followed several steps behind. Then he stopped. The smaller cub was still at the tree line. His brother had already reached the other side. For the first time, the distance between them was much greater than usual. The larger cub turned. The panda looked back. The smaller lion remained beneath the trees. A long moment passed. Then the larger cub did something he had never done before. He walked back. Not all the way, just halfway across the clearing, and stopped. Now the panda was waiting on one side of the open ground. The larger cub was waiting in the middle, and the smaller cub was still beneath the trees. No one moved toward him. No one forced the distance to disappear. They simply left the path open. Eventually, the smaller cub stepped into the clearing. He walked slowly at first, then faster. When he reached his brother, the larger cub turned around. The two crossed the remaining distance together. The panda started walking again. After that afternoon, something changed. Not in the smaller cub. He still hesitated. He still stopped to observe things his brother ignored. The change was in the larger one. He began looking back. At first, only occasionally, then more often. If the panda stopped, the cub stopped too. Sometimes he seemed to notice his brother was missing before the panda did. Weeks passed. Their bodies grew longer. Their paws became heavier. The larger cub became increasingly curious about everything beyond the path they were following. He would disappear behind a fallen trunk and emerge somewhere else. He would climb slopes his brother walked around. He would race across open ground simply because there was space to run. The smaller lion changed more quietly. The distances that once stopped him became shorter. The pauses became briefer, but they never disappeared completely, and the old panda still waited. Then, one morning, the larger cub went farther ahead than ever before. He crossed through a stand of bamboo and vanished beyond a low ridge. The panda continued until he reached the top. The smaller cub followed, but there was no lion waiting on the other side. The panda stopped. The smaller cub stopped beside him. For several moments, both looked across the valley below. Nothing moved except grass. The panda sat down. The smaller lion remained standing. Minutes passed. Then the cub did something unusual. He walked several meters down the slope, stopped, looked back at the panda, then looked toward the valley again. He waited. Eventually, a familiar shape appeared between the tall grass. The larger cub was returning. He climbed the slope without urgency and reached them. The smaller lion immediately turned toward the path, but the panda stayed seated for another moment. Then he rose, and the three continued. By the time the lions were nearly grown, the old rhythm had become much harder to see. There were fewer pauses now. Long stretches passed without anyone stopping. The two lions moved with more confidence, sometimes far ahead of the panda, sometimes behind him, sometimes on opposite sides of the path. They no longer needed to remain close, but they kept checking. A glance behind, a pause at the top of a slope, a few seconds beside a narrow trail before continuing. Small things, the kind of things that would have meant nothing to anyone who had not watched them grow. Then came the morning when the two lions did not follow the panda. He reached a familiar fork in the path. For years, he had always turned toward the bamboo. That morning, the lions stopped. The larger one looked toward the open country beyond the trees. His brother stood beside him. The panda continued several steps before noticing. He turned. Neither lion moved toward him. The old panda waited, just as he always had. But this time, the smaller lion was not hesitating. Both lions were looking in the same direction. The panda remained there for a while. Then he turned back toward the bamboo. He walked away alone. The lions watched until the forest hid him. Then they took the other path. Seasons passed. Their tracks grew larger. Their range widened far beyond the clearing, the bamboo and the paths they had once crossed beside an old panda. They became adult lions. And one afternoon, while moving through open country together, the brothers encountered another young lion. He was younger than them, but old enough to travel on his own. He followed at a distance for a while. The two brothers continued. Then the younger lion stopped. The larger brother kept walking. Several meters passed beneath his paws before he noticed something had changed. He turned. His brother was no longer beside him. The smaller of the two adult lions had stopped. Behind him, the young lion remained near the edge of the grass. For a moment, the larger brother stood alone farther ahead. Years earlier, the scene would have looked familiar. One moving first, one staying behind, and someone in the middle refusing to continue. The larger lion looked toward the path ahead, then back at his brother. He turned around. He walked back until he was beside him. Neither approached the younger lion. They simply waited. The young lion watched them. A few seconds passed. Then he moved forward. The brothers remained where they were. He came closer. Only when he reached them did the smaller brother turn toward the path. The larger one followed. 3 lions began walking across the grass. For a while, the youngest remained several steps behind. At the top of the next rise, the 2 brothers stopped. They waited until the 3rd lion reached them. Then all 3 disappeared over the ridge together. Far away in another part of the forest, the old panda still followed the same paths at the same unhurried pace. He would never see what happened on that ridge. He would never know that 2 lions had stopped there, or that they had waited. But once, many seasons earlier, one small lion had fallen behind, and the panda had refused to keep walking. If this story stayed with you, tell us which moment you will remember most. Subscribe for the next story.